When in a relationship, an avoidant will seek to create emotional distance between themselves and their partner. Emotional closeness feels unsafe. Emotional distance feels safe. This is especially applicable if you're dealing with a dismissive avoidant or a fearful avoidant that leans heavily dismissive. Fearful avoidants that lean more anxious tend to have different triggers, different behaviors. Back on point. That closeness gives the avoidant a ton of anxiety. As the relationship progresses, emotional intimacy builds if the avoidant is in a relationship with a partner that is emotionally available. So subconsciously, they will begin to do distancing behaviors. And these behaviors, which are triggered by the unconscious mind, they are often completely unaware of why they do. There are a variety of deactivation techniques, distancing behaviors that they will deploy. Deactivation is when they are removing themselves emotionally from the relationship, when they are disengaging, when they are creating emotional distance between themselves and their partner. First, the reason why they don't like emotional closeness is because they have a core wound of shame. Shame is a toxic emotion. It is not a healthy emotion, but it often gets confused with guilt. Guilt is a healthy emotion. When someone says something like, you should feel ashamed of yourself, what they really mean is you should feel guilty for what you did. If you feel guilty, well, it means you have a conscience, but guilt is your brain's way of saying, I did something wrong. And guilt can be resolved. You can make amends if you hurt somebody, or you could stop repeating the behavior that you feel guilty about. So guilt actually has a resolution. But whereas guilt is I did something wrong, shame is I am something wrong. I am defective. I am worthless. I am not lovable. I am wrong. And shame is a toxic emotion that serves no purpose, and there's no resolution to shame. So where does that shame come from? It comes from the consistent childhood emotional neglect that the avoidant experienced as a youth. They were not given that love and nurturing in the way that they needed. The thing is, they personalized it. They grew up to feel defective, unlovable, like there's something inherently wrong with them, that they are broken and worthless. So, to shield themselves from being exposed as being unlovable and worthless, they put up walls around their heart. And of course, they're not unlovable and worthless. It's just what they believe themselves to be. But these walls are a defense mechanism. If they can keep their partner on the other side of their wall, they feel like they can avoid being exposed as defective, avoid being exposed as unlovable. But their fear is if I let my partner in and I let them into my heart, I let them pass the wall, my partner is going to figure me out and I will be exposed as being unlovable, defective, and worthless, and I'll be rejected and abandoned. So that's why vulnerability feels so unsafe because if they're vulnerable, they are risking exposure of being perceived as defective and getting rejected and abandoned. So they look to create emotional distance when things get too close. Now they go into a relationship seeking love and connection is what they want, but when they get it, it triggers their fears. Because when they get into a relationship with a partner that is emotionally available, that's the partner that triggers them because an emotionally available partner is naturally going to build emotional intimacy with them. The closeness is going to form. That closeness feels unsafe. So they feel the urge to push them away. And due to a lack of self reflection, most avoidants are unaware of why they feel this anxiety and why they feel the urge to push their partner away. Because that wound of shame is why they don't self reflect. Because self reflection requires processing emotions, not suppressing them. It requires taking accountability, acknowledging one's own shortcomings and one's own mistakes. Hey, I did this wrong. This is how I can do better. I made this mistake. This is how I can learn and improve. That's how we grow, acknowledging our mistakes and building upon them. But for the avoidant, if they acknowledge a mistake or a wrongdoing, in their mind it confirms their own perceived inner defectiveness and shame. I did this wrong because I'm defective. I did this wrong because I'm unlovable. Too painful. So they look to project their fears and behaviors onto external things, meaning they need to make it somebody else's fault, or at the very least, not their fault. Well, if the closeness is building, well, it's their partner. Their partner's too needy, or they're just fundamentally incompatible. See, this person loves Italian food, and I don't like Italian food, so we're incompatible. Doing that mental gymnastics to avoid having to confront the wound of shame and taking accountability for their insecurities and behaviors. If they can find external things to blame it on, well, that's it. They don't have to self reflect because it's not their fault, so they can avoid poking at that core wound of shame. So, due to the lack of self reflection, they are often unaware of why they feel the urge to push a person away, usually telling themselves stuff like, well, this person's too needy, or work is too busy, or we're just incompatible, I'm just not ready for a relationship, um, things along those kind of lines. So, they look to create distance, and there are very common techniques that they use to create this distance. One is simply just pulling back, right? Communicating less, being less responsive on messages through text, not being easy to get on the phone, avoiding FaceTimes, canceling plans, canceling them last minute, constantly creating distance and creating more time and space in between interactions of any kind. Because it's hard to build intimacy with the person that you're barely communicating with and barely seeing. So that right there creates that emotional distance for them. Another tactic that they often use is cheating. Cheating creates emotional distance between themselves and their primary partner. Because think about it this way. How can you really have emotional intimacy with a person that you are actively betraying? You can't. You can't build closeness when you are cheating on the person. So cheating can absolutely create emotional distance between themselves and their primary partner. Plus, for the avoidant, the cheating has the added benefit of a dopamine rush, that feel good chemical that goes off in the brain when you're doing something fun or thrilling. That dopamine can help them feel good and numb the pain and numb the emotions that they're trying not to face. Plus, the cheating activity is a distraction, and distractions also help them avoid so they don't have to think about the emotions and things that they don't want to face in their lives. Now, another distancing behavior is nitpicking, fault finding in their partner. If they can constantly keep criticizing their partner or finding things that their partner's doing wrong, you're, you sip your coffee too loudly. You are 5 minutes late all the time. You're too slow of a driver. You are too disorganized. Or you like t shirts too much and I prefer polos. Things along those kind of lines. Finding very, very silly little faults. And one, it's hard to create emotional distance. I mean, it's hard to create emotional closeness when you're constantly nitpicking the other person because the other person is going to feel pushed away by that behavior when everything you do seems to be wrong in the eyes of the avoidant. And by the way, this is why they often get confused with narcissists as well, because narcissists will do the devaluation phase, and it feels a lot like that when they're finding fault in everything you're doing. Plus, when the avoidant finds the fault in you, it becomes your fault that they feel the urge to push you away, your fault that they feel the urge to run away, and they don't have to take accountability. Again, justifying their actions to avoid accountability. But it really does sever emotional intimacy when you have the other person constantly walking on eggshells, feeling like they aren't good enough, and everything that they do is wrong. Now, another way that they can look to sever that emotional intimacy is through gaslighting, because gaslighting is absolutely a distancing behavior. And gaslighting is when they plant the seeds of doubt in their partner's mind to avoid accountability. Because if their partner is doubting themselves and doubting their perceptions, doubting their reality, the avoidant gets to escape accountability. But gaslighting naturally causes anxiety and confusion in a relationship. The person being gaslit certainly does not feel close to the person that they're being gaslit by. There's only one reason why anybody ever gaslights, and that's to escape accountability. But taking no accountability creates emotional distance. And now that leads into the next one, taking no accountability. Accountability naturally builds closeness. Because when you say sorry, when you take ownership, it's conflict resolution, it's being vulnerable. It builds closeness together. But when someone refuses to take accountability, always has an excuse, or blames the other person, it naturally creates that emotional distance that the avoidant is craving. Taking space. Every time things get close, well, suddenly they need to take space and they need to distance themselves. I need a few days, and they just disappear. That kind of coincides with pulling away, but often they'll say they need space and just take it. Well, that distance does create emotional distance as well. Another way is immersing themselves in work or hobbies. Because if they become too busy with work, hobbies, or even friends and family, they're now too busy to spend time with their partner to build that intimacy, and intimacy gets severed. Always traveling for work, working late hours, got a tea time tomorrow. Oh, a scuba diving trip the next day. Oh, got plans with this friend. Oh, I need to see this family member. And the relationship, their partner goes to the bottom of the priority list. So they're deprioritizing their partner, prioritizing everything else over their partner, which absolutely creates emotional distance. Now, one more way that they create emotional distance is by ending the relationship. Closeness built too much. There's other things like expectations, and that just becomes absolutely triggering. Maybe there's a conflict or two, and that's it. They just need all of that distance. They've convinced themselves that it's not their fault. This person's incompatible for them, and it's just not going to work. So they sever the relationship, often abruptly, and just completely create the distance permanently. And all of it can be very stressful and agonizing and anxiety creating to be on the receiving end of. Because here you are being consistent, trying to give this person all the love, effort, and commitment that you have to give. And they're constantly just pushing you away through various different ways. And it creates anxiety. It creates attachment anxiety because anxious attachment is created when your emotional needs are met sometimes, but then they're taken away from you. So your brain is now getting trained that anytime you're getting love and affection, especially from the avoidant here, it can be ripped away from you. So you're desperately feeling anxious, trying to cling on to it. So as they are doing these distancing behaviors, the person that is on the receiving end of it is feeling more and more and more anxiety in the relationship, feeling less and less secure. Now, when they're doing these distancing behaviors, you do actually have the ability to do something about it. You can hold boundaries. Boundaries are your limits of what you want, what you don't want, what you'll tolerate, not tolerate, what you need, what you don't need, and what your expectations are. When they are doing distancing behaviors and distance doesn't work for you in a relationship, you want that closeness, you want that emotional intimacy, you can hold a boundary. And a boundary doesn't have to be a deal breaker. I mean, it can. You can have a deal breaker boundary like if you cheat on me, I'm gone. But most boundaries are enforced through simple communication. This is how I feel. This is what I need. This is what my expectations are. This is a boundary of mine. So, for example, a boundary can be held on communication. Consistent communication is something that's really important to me in a relationship. And if space is needed, that's okay, but I need to be communicated with so I'm not left in the dark. When I'm left in the dark and I don't hear from my partner for days, I feel like I'm not being considered and I feel unimportant. So it really is a boundary of mine. And if consistent communication is something that you're not willing to do, then this relationship doesn't work for me. Now, another boundary that you can hold is over canceling plans, spending time together. When they constantly move that goalpost and are constantly canceling plans last minute. When plans are canceled on me last minute, it really makes me feel like I'm not being considered because my time is important to me and it means a lot to me to have my time valued by my partner. I understand that sometimes things do happen last minute, but when it's this consistent, it really makes me feel unimportant and it really is a boundary of mine. And if effort is not made to be consistent and reliable with plans, then this relationship likely doesn't work for me. And you can hold that kind of boundary with any of these distancing behaviors. But that said, if their distancing behavior is cheating, well, chances are, unless they take true radical accountability, true ownership of it, and go seek therapy to heal those attachment wounds that drove them to cheat in the first place, they're likely to do it again because most avoidants that cheat become serial cheaters if they are not working on themselves. It becomes like an addiction. They're constantly creating the distance, getting that validation from outside of the relationship, chasing that dopamine rush. And then after they do that, they feel worse about themselves because, again, it's not a healthy behavior and they already have a wound of shame. So now they're feeling worse. So they go back to cheating as the way to soothe that wound, to soothe that pain, so they don't have to face feeling worse. So you can't make them cheat, by the way, and nothing you could ever do wrong could make them cheat. Cheating is absolutely a choice, and it's always a responsibility of the cheater. But if they are cheating and that is their distancing technique, rest assured, if they're not taking complete radical ownership and accountability, they are very, very likely to do it to you again. Now, not all avoidants cheat, but they are more likely to cheat than other attachment styles due to their attachment wounds and desire to create emotional distance. But if you are being a consistent, loving, affectionate partner and you are giving this person your all and you're showing up in a healthy way, even if you're not perfect, no one's perfect. You are not responsible for these distancing behaviors. This is the responsibility of this person, right? Their lack of communication is their choice. Their behaviors are their choices. Yes, their choices are fueled by insecurities. We understand this, that come from emotional neglect in childhood. But this is still a fully grown adult. And they still have choices. And these choices, when they're doing this distancing behavior, lacks empathy. Empathy is a core component of emotional availability because an emotionally available person has the ability and the willingness to empathize with their partner, to care about their feelings, wants, needs, perspective, to share their emotions along with them. When they're doing these behaviors, they're not considering you at all. They're not considering the impact that these behaviors will have on you, the anxiety it creates, and the blow to the self esteem of their partner that it creates. They're not thinking of that at all. They're only thinking of themselves and whatever they perceive that they want, need, feel, or fear in the moment. So there is no empathy in these distancing behaviors. And that's because if they're not working on themselves and they're doing this stuff, they are emotionally unavailable to you. So recognize that you are not responsible for their emotional availability. That is their issue that they need to want to work on in order to become a partner that can sustain a long-term healthy relationship. When you see any of these behaviors, be kind to yourself. Don't blame yourself. It's not your fault. And hold your boundaries because ultimately your boundaries are what will protect you and prevent you from spending more time and emotional energy into a person that's not investing it into you. Because when you hold your boundaries, they're either going to respect them or they're not. But if they're not, well, that tells you everything you need to know. And it's time to ask yourself, does this relationship work for me if they're not even showing any effort, care, or concern for my needs, my feelings, my boundaries, and they're not showing up for me? Because you show up for them, you deserve a partner that will also show up for you, and don't sell yourself short.